Suicide hotline operators. Have you ever had calls where you thought help wouldn't reach your client in time? How did you come to terms with it? I work in ambulance communications. I was on the phone with a lady out in a semi-rural area on a very busy night for us. She had found her boyfriend hanging from a tree in his favorite park. She told me that it was his favorite place to come and sit to watch the dogs. He'd sent her a suicide text and she had just thought to look there. I spoke to her for about 30 minutes before we got police assistance. We requested fire and police since our ETA lights and sirens was 35 minutes. She had nothing to cut him down and no way to climb high enough to try and undo the rope. For 30 minutes she held him up as best she could with his feet on her shoulders. He'd been hanging for 30 minutes to 1 hour. And couldn't be revived. I hope she got the help she needs to keep going from that. She did everything she could. That's the worst call I've ever taken. I worked at a SP hotline for about a year. And one call that comes to mind was when a caller said they didn't want to die alone but had already taken a lethal amount of pills. They said they were parked in a lot somewhere they wouldn't disclose and the only information I had to pass off to emergency services was their phone number. I felt so worried that information wouldn't be enough to get them helped in time. But once they hung up the call and wouldn't answer my calls back, I realized there was only so much that this person allowed me to do for them, and I did absolutely everything I could with it. Being able to understand that brought me some peace. Knowing that I will be there as much as someone will let me, and I'll do the best that I can with whatever is in my power, and that's all we can do for others and that's all we can ask of ourselves. Not a hotline operator. When I was about 13, my best friend, at the time, called me to tell me she'd took an overdose and wanted to say goodbye. She's had a really troubled childhood and was always running away and self-harmed a lot. I talked to her for a bit to get more information and then told her I'd have to call her back because my mum wanted to use the phone. Once she'd hung up, I told my mum everything and we called an ambulance for her. I called her back and kept her talking. I knew the ambulance had arrived when she started screaming at me down the phone that I'd lied to her and broken her trust. She survived. We never spoke again. I found out years later she'd actually wrote me a letter while in hospital, but my mum never gave it to me. She'd read it and decided to throw it away. I never knew what was in it. My friend continued having a troubled life but then found God and started sorting her life out. Unfortunately, she died from heart failure a few years back. I always thought she hated me for what I did. It upsets me we never got to talk again, and I've always resented my mum for keeping that letter a secret. Not a suicide line operator, but when I was 17 I tried to jump off a bridge. At the time I was in a psychiatric hospital and had leave, where I hadn't returned. When I started to have suicidal thoughts I rang the ward where I was staying. I spoke to one of the nurses, Tony, who tried to calm me down. He was a big burly man, almost 7 foot tall and built like a bouncer. While I was stood on the bridge, some guys pulled over to see if I was okay. I freaked out and hung up the phone on Tony. The last thing he heard me say was, "Fuck off." The guys ended up restraining me and calling the police. The police took me back to the ward and Tony was waiting outside to take me back in. He was crying and told me that for the first time in his 15 years working there he genuinely thought he had lost someone. I am not, nor have I ever been, a suicide hotline operator, but I owe my life to one. At the age of 24 I was run over by a car, shattered my left leg in 2 places, blew my right knee out, broke left shoulder, bruised a lung and kidney, and a host of other issues. First time I called the suicide hotline was actually to find out how my parents, was living with them at the time, could get me thrown into the hospital in case I went off the deep end if the settlement didn't go like it was supposed to. At the time of that call I knew I was mentally unstable. The lady I got was great with a lot of helpful tips and just told me that she was genuinely moved, as most people that called the line were only thinking about themselves. She was actually crying. Second time I called was about a year or 2 after that. I had just tried to drive my dad's car into the middle of Lake Hartwell, but at the last second I managed to stop myself. Got myself home. Was sobbing and scared shitless. Called the number again in a panic as I knew I was still ready to off myself. Got really lucky, got the same woman and she remembered me. She saved my life that night. Hell, she is the one that got me an appointment the next day to see a counselor. So to all of you that are and have worked on a suicide or mental health hotline, I just want to say thank you for being there. And know that no matter the outcome, those of us that have either temporarily or permanently lost our light truly thank you for being there. Know that even if we have lost the battle against our demons, it is not your fault. You did what you could for us and we thank you. Continue to shine the light. And please look out for your own mental health. Was an ambulance call taker for a little while. The amount of psych calls on a daily basis was in itself depressing. If you think they're going to hurt themselves or are in danger, you must stay on the line. I've spoken to people who were actively cutting themselves while on the phone and I had to tell her to stop. Another was having a manic PTSD episode and I was on the phone with her for 40 minutes before the ambos arrived. That was an exhausting call. Had another who wanted to end it. They had recently gone through gender reassignment and were having mixed feelings. Had others try to OD and they were choking on their vomit. A few others I can't remember. But there's always the fear you're going to say something that triggers them into going over the edge. Fortunately for me, most just call because they want someone to listen and to get help. But there have been others who have called just before jumping in front of trains just so they can hear one last voice. Mental health is so damn important and is being overlooked way too much. I fear not only for the victims and their families but also the emergency services who have to physically be there to manage them. Edit, to add to that, I had a girlfriend call for her BF who was threatening to end his life. Made a rookie error and called him and he hung up. Always wonder if I did anything to make it worse. But I think they found him okay. That call was a punch to the gut. I volunteered at one for a few years. It was very rare that someone was in immediate danger. Most of the calls were people who were contemplating suicide and didn't have an exact time frame or imminent plan. You can't send an ambulance to them if it's not an immediate danger. But just try your best to talk them out of future plans. I never knew if they eventually went through with it or not. While not a suicide hotline operator, a friend called me in tears saying he had drank bleach. Obviously I didn't really know what to do, so I stayed on the phone talking to him and used someone else's phone to call an ambulance. He was alive when they got there but he died a few hours later. Honestly, it's horrible knowing someone is dying and the help they need might not reach them in time. I had a friend call into a suicide hotline. They ended up committing him and putting him in the hospital. When he got out, he received so many medical bills that he could never afford. That he made a suicide attempt. This just got him back into the hospital with even more bills. In America there is so much exploitation of the sick. It makes me wonder how many want the help but can't afford it. I was an intervention operator for 3 years and a trainer for 2. In my experience, it was extremely rare because people who call are looking for help. It's the people who don't ever call that make up most of the suicides we hear about, or don't. There was a call where it was clear the caller was getting more and more confused, disoriented. They had admitted having consumed pills, but couldn't say what or how many. We alerted the authorities near the beginning of the call when it became clear the person was in distress, slurred speech, vomiting, etc., and it was a difficult wait. We eventually heard them break in the door and confirm the room was littered with empty pill bottles. For the mental health of all staff. We never had any feedback on the outcomes of our interventions for exactly the reason you are, I think, alluding to in your question. Knowing you lost a caller would be devastating. In the end, having a good support system debriefing process in place can reduce the possibility of post-traumatic effects or vicarious trauma. Hope this helps. I got a call once from a kid. He sounded maybe 15 or 16. He had just been removed from his house and put into a foster care center or something. He didn't really know where he was. He said he had taken an entire bottle of melatonin and Tylenol and just wanted someone to know his story before he died. He had said his phone was going to die. But near the end of the call, he was fading in and out more. And I'm not sure if his phone did die or if he passed out from the pills in the end after he went silent. I had no idea where he was and neither did he, so I didn't know what to tell the 911 operators. I still have no idea what happened to him. I sometimes think about him and hope he is okay. Former EMT. I remember talking to one of our 911 dispatchers who was on the phone with someone who called 911 because they were afraid they were going to hurt themselves. During the entire call they were crunching and chewing something. Eventually the dispatcher had to ask them what they were chomping on. They said it was their psych meds. I don't know how it ended. But EMS was en route as soon as they said they were afraid. Not a suicide hotline operator but a 911 dispatcher. I took a call almost exactly 5 months ago. A very defeated sounding person called saying he wanted to kill himself because he couldn't sleep. After some discussion and talking him down, I told him that not being able to sleep is rough on the mind and body, but can be an easy fix. And it's worth it to hang in there. I also noticed that throughout the call, I heard a familiar sound of a pump of a shotgun clacking against its tube. I asked the caller if he had any weapons. He said he had a shotgun propped up to his jaw. I told him to put the shotgun down and that our officer's help was very close. He replied with, "I'm going to do it." He had such conviction in his voice. All I could tell him was that I didn't want him to do it. I didn't even know this guy. He didn't know me. How do I prove this isn't the answer? I told him help was a block away. There was a pause. I said his name at the exact instant the phone started cutting out. I thought I was going to lose him but the call was still connect thankfully. My officer said he was on scene. I asked the caller if he'd put his gun down and come outside to meet the officer. I heard him push his chair in and set the gun on down. I breathed a sigh of relief thinking he'd go outside, and this guy would get the help he needed. I still had an open line, and listened for a bit. I heard my officer make entry. I was very confused but thought the caller went out the back door. The next words I heard were from my officer. "Dispatch." He deployed the shotgun. The static I heard on the line was the shotgun firing. The noise of him pushing the wooden chair in on his tile floor was his body falling off the chair, hitting the ground. The sound of the gun being put down was it failing from his hands. And the call wasn't a 911 call. It was a death notification. I had a close friend that killed himself a year ago after another friend killed himself. They were best friends so it wasn't that surprising since he was devastated. But his mom was sure that he was killed. In my state we don't have a suicide hotline. We have this therapy hotline for those who just need to speak with someone. My friend contacted them after our suggestion. They don't have any law about not discussing personal information with others cause they work with police in case they have calls from murderers or rapists. So they record the calls. The mom asked for the recordings of that call and after a few weeks the brother showed us that same recording. It was so calm yet so sad. He explained that he was going to do it but wanted to say everything to someone before he left. He didn't want to die alone in his room. He spoke with the lady for a good hour about everything. About school, his friends, family, love interests. He even played guitar for a while. The lady was doing her best, trying to change his mind but he politely declined every offer of help. At the end you can sense how the lady just gave up and just did what he wanted. Talked with him like they were friends. She was lovely. I felt so bad for her the moment she realized that there's nothing she could do. I get that they are trained for that but they are still human beings with feelings. At the end the mom was so grateful with the lady. BC at least her son didn't die alone. He was speaking with someone that sounded like she cared for him. Weird but it was the closure we somehow needed. Not me but my stepdad. My stepdad's friend was in the garage with his dad. And something happened. I can't remember what he said had happened but the dad got impaled in the head. The friend saw his own father die in his own hands. That really messed him up to the point where he became suicidal. One night when my stepdad and his friend went up to the bar to have a good time, everything was normal until he up and stopped talking to the girl he was talking to and walked out. My stepdad knew something was up so he followed him back to the apartment they shared. He got there and opened the door to see his friend hanging from a ceiling fan. My stepdad tackled him to the ground and called 911. They took him to the hospital and even put him in the psychic ward for a few days. Luckily he made a full recovery and is doing well today. Him and my stepdad are still great friends to this day. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. See you next time.